The air inside the bustling terminal was thick with a mixture of jet fuel and anticipation. Passengers hurried past Gabrielle Walker, dragging suitcases behind them, their faces lit with excitement, exhaustion, or stress. For her, it was supposed to be a simple trip, another meeting, another negotiation. She pulled her sleek carry-on suitcase, its polished leather gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and adjusted her scarf. Her outfit, a tailored navy business suit and pearl earrings, spoke volumes about her success. Approaching the first-class check-in counter, Gabrielle couldn't help but notice the subtle glances she often received in places like this. Some were admiring, others tinged with something less pleasant. She smiled at the attendant, handed over her ID and ticket, and waited patiently as they processed her check-in. "All set, Miss Walker," the attendant said, her tone polite but brisk. "Your gate is B14. Enjoy your flight." Gabrielle returned the smile, collecting her boarding pass. The transaction was seamless, yet a faint shadow of unease crept up her spine, a feeling she had learned to trust over the years. She pushed it aside, attributing it to the stress of the upcoming meeting. As she walked toward security, she could already hear the faint calls for final boarding from nearby gates. The security line was moderately long but moved quickly. Gabrielle joined the queue, placing her laptop and shoes into a bin with practiced efficiency. She passed through the metal detector without incident, only for a stern voice to call out behind her. "Ma'am, step aside for additional screening." Gabrielle turned, startled. A tall man in a crisp TSA uniform stood a few feet away, his cold blue eyes locking onto hers. His badge read James Cole. His voice was firm, almost dismissive, as if he had already decided something about her. "Is there a problem?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. Cole motioned toward her carry-on. "Random inspection." "Step aside." She sighed internally but nodded. Random inspections were not uncommon, though this didn't feel random at all. She moved to the designated area where Cole began rifling through her belongings with a casual indifference that felt almost performative. He held up her boarding pass, squinting at it. "This looks fake," he said, his voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Gabrielle's stomach dropped. "Excuse me? Where did you get this?" he demanded, ignoring her shocked expression. Gabrielle's voice remained calm, though a sharp edge crept into her words. "I purchased it through my company's travel agency." "It's valid." Cole didn't even look up. "We'll see about that." By now, a few travelers had slowed down, their curiosity piqued. Gabrielle felt their eyes on her, judging her, questioning her legitimacy. Her heart raced, but her years in high-stakes corporate negotiations had taught her to mask such emotions. "Sir, if you could just check the barcode, you'll see that it's valid," she said, her voice steady but firm. "This is unnecessary." Cole scoffed. "People like you always think you can cheat the system." He held up her ticket for emphasis, as if displaying a piece of counterfeit evidence to a jury. The comment stung. Gabrielle's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "People like me," she repeated, her voice dropping an octave. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Cole's face flushed, but he didn't back down. "You heard me." Before she could respond, Cole stepped away, speaking into his radio. Moments later, 2 additional officers arrived. Gabrielle's pulse quickened. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was turning into a spectacle. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with us, ma'am," Cole said. His tone was officious yet laced with a faint hint of smugness. Gabrielle glanced at the growing crowd, then back at the officers. She knew she had nothing to hide, but the indignity of the situation gnawed at her. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her composure. "Fine. Lead the way." As she followed the officers through a side door, her mind raced. She needed to call Victor, he would know how to handle this. But before she could retrieve her phone, one of the officers snatched it from her hand. "No phones," Cole said curtly. Gabrielle stared at him, disbelief washing over her. "This is absurd." "You can explain that to us in the back," he replied, his tone icy. The door closed behind her, and the noise of the terminal faded away. She was alone with her thoughts now, and the gravity of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about her. This was about something much bigger, something that had followed her in one form or another her entire life. Little did Cole know, the woman he had just humiliated was not someone who would crumble under pressure. She was someone who thrived in it. The air in the back room was stifling, a stark contrast to the open, chaotic energy of the terminal. Gabrielle sat on a metal chair, her hands resting on the cold table in front of her. The walls were bare, save for a clock that ticked too loudly, mocking the silence. Across from her, Officer James Cole leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her like a predator assessing its prey. His smirk was faint but unmistakable. "Let's start again," Cole said, dropping her boarding pass onto the table with a dramatic flourish. "Where exactly did you get this?" Gabrielle met his gaze, her expression calm despite the storm of emotions brewing beneath. "I've already explained that. It was issued by my company's travel agency. Do you have proof?" His tone was laced with sarcasm, as if he already knew her answer. She exhaled sharply. "My phone, which you confiscated, has the confirmation email." Cole's smirk widened. "Convenient." Gabrielle didn't flinch. Years of navigating corporate boardrooms had taught her how to stay composed under scrutiny. She wasn't about to let this man rattle her, no matter how blatant his contempt. "Why don't you check with the airline?" she suggested, her voice measured. "Oh, we will," Cole said, straightening. "But first, I have a few more questions." "Questions that could easily be answered if you verified my ticket," she countered, her patience thinning. "Instead, you've chosen to humiliate me publicly and detain me without cause." Cole chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "You're awfully confident for someone in your position." Gabrielle leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "And you're awfully reckless for someone in yours." The smile slipped from Cole's face, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Before he could respond, the door opened, and a second officer entered, a woman this time. Her uniform was crisp, her expression unreadable as she handed Cole a folder. "Here's her file," the officer said, glancing briefly at Gabrielle before stepping back. Cole opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. Gabrielle could see his confidence falter, his smug demeanor cracking ever so slightly. He looked up, his gaze sharper now, almost calculating. "Corporate attorney, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You must think you're pretty untouchable." Gabrielle didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth was written all over his face. He hadn't expected her to have a professional background, let alone one that commanded respect. The door opened again, and this time it wasn't another officer, it was Victor Walker. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Victor was tall, commanding, his presence almost magnetic. Dressed in a tailored suit, he looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom rather than an airport security office. His eyes scanned the room, taking in Gabrielle, the officers, and the tension that hung in the air. "Victor," Gabrielle said, relief washing over her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low but steady. She nodded. "For now." Victor turned to Cole, his expression unreadable. "Officer Cole, is it?" Cole straightened, the confidence he displayed earlier returning in a weak attempt to assert authority. "And you are?" Victor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black wallet. He flipped it open, revealing a badge that made Cole's face pale. "Victor Walker, chairman of the board of this airline." The room fell silent. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Cole and Victor. Gabrielle crossed her arms, watching as the color drained from Cole's face. Victor's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Would you care to explain why my wife has been detained and humiliated over a valid ticket?" Cole stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating. I was just following protocol, sir." The ticket looked suspicious, and "Did you verify it with the airline?" Victor interrupted, his tone razor-sharp. "Well, not yet, but..." Victor held up a hand, silencing him. "Not yet? So you made the decision to detain her without even confirming the validity of her ticket?" Cole opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Gabrielle watched him squirm, a small part of her savoring the sight. She had dealt with men like Cole before, bullies who hid behind their positions of power, never expecting to be called out. This isn't just incompetence, Victor continued, his voice rising slightly. This is harassment. It's unprofessional, unethical, and frankly, it's unacceptable. Cole's shoulders sagged, his earlier confidence completely shattered. The second officer looked as though she wanted to disappear. Victor stepped closer, his eyes locked on Cole. I want a full report on this incident by the end of the day, including an explanation as to why standard verification procedures were ignored. And rest assured, this will not go unnoticed. Cole nodded mutely, his face a mixture of fear and humiliation. Victor turned to Gabrielle, his expression softening. Let's get you out of here. As they left the room, Gabrielle could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders. But the incident wasn't over, not by a long shot. She knew Victor well enough to know that he wasn't just going to let this slide. We'll deal with this, he said quietly as they walked toward the terminal. But first, let's make sure you don't miss your flight. Gabrielle smiled faintly, grateful for his unwavering support. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Cole's actions had revealed more than just personal bias, they hinted at a deeper problem, one that she couldn't ignore. Gabrielle sat in the quiet comfort of the airline's VIP lounge, a steaming cup of chamomile tea in front of her. The gentle hum of conversation and the soft clinking of glasses provided a stark contrast to the chaos she'd just endured, yet her mind refused to settle. Every detail of the incident replayed in her head, not just as a personal affront but as a glaring symptom of a systemic issue she had seen too many times before. Victor sat beside her, his presence a steadying force. His jaw was tight, the only outward sign of his frustration. He rarely let emotions cloud his judgment, a trait that had served him well in the cutthroat world of corporate aviation. But today, even he seemed rattled. They need to be held accountable, Vic, Gabrielle said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm but resolute, each word carrying the weight of her conviction. This wasn't just about me. It's about every person who's been made to feel like they don't belong. Victor nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the distance. You're right. And we will. But we need to handle this carefully. A public misstep could undermine everything we've worked for. Gabrielle appreciated his pragmatism, but her patience was wearing thin. Carefully doesn't mean quietly, she replied. This can't be swept under the rug. Victor reached for her hand, his grip firm yet reassuring. It won't be. Trust me. An hour later, Gabrielle found herself in a private conference room deep within the airport. The room was stark, with white walls and a single mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. Victor had called an emergency meeting with the airline's senior management, and Gabrielle insisted on being there. The room filled quickly. Executives shuffled in, their expressions ranging from concern to defensiveness. Among them was Michael Grayson, the airport's director of security. He was a tall man with a graying beard, his eyes sharp and calculating. Gabrielle recognized his type immediately, someone more concerned with optics than justice. Victor began, his voice steady but commanding. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you may have heard, my wife, Gabrielle, was subjected to an egregious incident of racial profiling by one of our security officers today. Murmurs rippled through the room. Grayson shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing. Mr. Walker, I assure you, our staff are trained to. Victor cut him off with a raised hand. Spare me the rehearsed assurances, Michael. This wasn't a matter of training. This was a deliberate act of harassment. Gabrielle watched as Grayson's face reddened, his composure faltering. With all due respect, Grayson began, we take these matters very seriously, but random screenings are a necessary part of security protocol. This wasn't random, Gabrielle interjected, her voice sharp. Your officer, James Cole, targeted me because of my appearance. He didn't even attempt to verify my ticket before escalating the situation. That's not protocol, it's prejudice. The room fell silent. Gabrielle's words hung heavy in the air, a truth too glaring to ignore. Grayson hesitated, then spoke carefully. We will, of course, conduct a thorough investigation. You'll do more than that, Victor interrupted, his tone icy. Effective immediately, Officer Cole is suspended pending further review. And I want an external audit of your department's practices, starting today. Gabrielle watched the room's reaction closely. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Grayson's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. As the meeting adjourned, Gabrielle and Victor stayed behind to review the preliminary report on Cole. What they uncovered left them both stunned. This can't be right, Gabrielle murmured, scrolling through the document on her tablet. Victor leaned over, his eyes narrowing as he read. What is it? Cole's been flagged before, she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Multiple complaints of misconduct, harassment, excessive force, but he was promoted last year, despite all of it. Victor's face darkened. Who signed off on his promotion? Gabrielle tapped a few more times, then froze. Michael Grayson. Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. So it's not just Cole. This goes deeper. Gabrielle nodded, her mind racing. Grayson's defensive behavior during the meeting suddenly made sense. He wasn't just protecting Cole, he was protecting himself. We need to act fast, Victor said. If this gets out before we address it, the entire airline's reputation will be at risk. Gabrielle shook her head. This isn't just about PR, Victor. It's about integrity. If Grayson's complicit, he needs to go. And we need to make sure this system of enabling toxic behavior ends here. Victor placed a hand on her shoulder. Then let's make it happen. Later that evening, Gabrielle sat in her hotel room, the city skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The day's events had left her drained, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She opened her laptop and began drafting a letter to the board, outlining her findings and recommendations. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Victor. Meeting scheduled with the board tomorrow morning. We set things right. Gabrielle smiled faintly, then turned back to her screen. This wasn't just about setting things right for herself, it was about ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had. As she typed, the words came easily, fueled by a sense of purpose. She was no stranger to battles like this, but this one felt personal in a way others hadn't. It wasn't just her dignity at stake, it was a fight for justice, for change, and for every voice that had been silenced by a system designed to ignore them. And she was ready to fight. The boardroom was an expanse of polished oak, glass walls, and commanding views of the city below. Gabrielle stood near the large conference table, her presence radiating calm authority. To her left, Victor Walker prepared a presentation, his demeanor equally composed but carrying a quiet intensity. Around the table sat the airline's board of directors, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Everyone knew this wasn't just another routine meeting, this was about accountability, something few in the room had ever expected to face in such stark terms. Victor began, "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I wish today's meeting could be under different circumstances, but an incident occurred yesterday involving my wife, Gabrielle, that we cannot ignore." He gestured toward her, stepping aside to let her take the floor. Gabrielle faced the room, her eyes scanning each member deliberately before she spoke. "Yesterday, I was detained and humiliated by one of your security officers, James Cole. I was accused of presenting a fake ticket, denied verification of my credentials, and publicly handcuffed, all without justification." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. This isn't just a personal grievance, this is a systemic issue rooted in bias and negligence. Gabrielle clicked a button on the remote in her hand, and a series of slides appeared on the large screen behind her. The first displayed a record of formal complaints filed against Cole over the past 2 years. "These are the documented complaints against Officer Cole," she continued. 7 allegations of harassment, 4 of racial bias, and 2 reports of excessive force. Each was either dismissed or ignored. The directors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Gabrielle advanced to the next slide, a signed document approving Cole's promotion. "This is the authorization for Cole's promotion last year," she said. Signed by Michael Grayson, Director of Security. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the directors, a woman in her 50s with a sharp gaze, raised a hand. "Excuse me, Mrs. Walker. Are you suggesting that Mr. Grayson knowingly promoted an officer with this record?" Gabrielle met her gaze directly. "I'm not just suggesting it, I'm stating it as fact." The door opened, and Michael Grayson entered, his face tight with barely concealed irritation. He had been summoned late, deliberately, to prevent him from derailing the presentation. "Glad you could join us, Mr. Grayson," Victor said, his tone razor-sharp. Grayson sat stiffly, his eyes darting to the screen. "What's this about?" Gabrielle clicked to the next slide, surveillance footage from the terminal. The room fell silent as they watched Cole detain Gabrielle, his behavior aggressive and unwarranted. The footage then shifted to Cole accepting a bribe from another passenger earlier that day. "This is your officer, Mr. Grayson," Gabrielle said, her voice steady but cutting. "And this is your department under your leadership." Grayson's face turned crimson. "This is taken out of context." Victor slammed his hand on the table, silencing him. "Enough. You failed this company, and you've endangered the very passengers we're sworn to serve. Your excuses won't save you now." Gabrielle wasn't done. She advanced to the final slide, revealing an email chain between Grayson and a private contractor. "This," she said, pointing to the screen, "is evidence of a scheme to divert funds meant for staff training into personal accounts. Mr. Grayson not only enabled unethical behavior but actively profited from it." The boardroom erupted. Voices overlapped, questions flying. Grayson stood, his voice shaking. "You can't prove anything." "We already have," Victor said, cutting him off. "Legal counsel is reviewing the evidence as we speak. Your resignation will be submitted before the end of the day, or we'll proceed with termination and prosecution." Grayson sank back into his chair, his confidence shattered. The meeting concluded with swift decisions. Cole was officially terminated, and Grayson's resignation was demanded on the spot. An external audit of the security department was authorized, with Gabrielle leading the oversight committee. As the directors filed out, Victor placed a hand on Gabrielle's shoulder. "You were incredible in there." She smiled faintly but didn't allow herself to relax. "This is just the beginning. We've exposed the problem, but now we have to fix it." Victor nodded, his expression resolute. "And we will, together." That evening, Gabrielle sat in her office, reflecting on the day's events. She knew this fight wasn't over. Systemic change required persistence, resilience, and a willingness to face resistance at every turn. But for the first time in years, she felt hopeful. Her phone buzzed, a text from one of the directors. "Thank you for your courage. Today was a wake-up call." Gabrielle smiled, placing her phone down. She had always believed in the power of justice, but now she had the opportunity to wield it on a larger scale, and she intended to use it wisely. Gabrielle Walker sat in the warm glow of her office late into the evening, the events of the day looping in her mind. Exposing the systemic failures of the airline security department was only the first step. Change didn't come easily, especially in a world built on entrenched power structures. The dismissal of James Cole and the resignation of Michael Grayson were victories, but they felt hollow without addressing the deeper rot that allowed them to thrive. She reached for her laptop and opened a blank document. Across the top, she typed, "Strategic Plan for Anti-Discrimination and Ethical Oversight." The keys clacked rhythmically as she poured her thoughts into actionable steps. Her legal mind, honed over years in corporate negotiations, was in full force now. Policies, training initiatives, third-party audits, it all had to be airtight. The following morning, Gabrielle presented her plan to Victor over breakfast in their sunlit dining room. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm croissants filled the air, but her mind was too focused to enjoy it. Victor scanned the document, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, his eyes shone with quiet admiration. "This is ambitious," he said. "It has to be," Gabrielle replied, her voice firm. "We're not just fixing the airline's reputation. We're setting a precedent for the entire industry." Victor nodded. "The board won't like the cost of implementing this." It's going to take a lot of convincing. Gabrielle leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. Then let's convince them. They need to understand this isn't just about money, it's about integrity. And if they can't see that, they shouldn't be on the board. Victor chuckled softly, shaking his head. I don't know what I'd do without you. She smiled faintly. You'd figure it out. But luckily, you don't have to. That afternoon, Gabrielle received an unexpected call from Eleanor Carter, the sharp-eyed director who had supported her during the board meeting. Eleanor was a seasoned executive with a reputation for being tough but fair. Mrs. Walker, Eleanor began, her tone brisk but warm. I wanted to thank you for your presentation yesterday. It was eye-opening. Thank you, Ms. Carter, Gabrielle replied. I appreciate your support. I've been thinking, Eleanor continued. We need to make sure this doesn't get buried under corporate politics. I want to help you push this plan through. Gabrielle was momentarily taken aback. Eleanor wasn't known for aligning herself with controversial initiatives. That means a lot, she said. But why the sudden interest? Eleanor hesitated, then sighed. Let's just say I've seen firsthand what happens when these issues are ignored. It's time I did something about it. Gabrielle nodded, sensing there was more to Eleanor's story than she was letting on. Then let's make it happen. As news of Cole's dismissal and Grayson's resignation leaked to the press, the airline became the center of a media storm. Headlines ranged from airline scandal, security bias exposed, to corporate leadership faces reckoning over discrimination allegations. Gabrielle knew this was both a blessing and a curse. Public scrutiny would pressure the board to act quickly, but it also meant walking a tightrope. Any misstep could escalate the situation further. One particularly pointed op-ed caught her attention. Will real change follow, or is this just damage control? The words stung not because they were unfair, but because they echoed her own fears. Change wasn't guaranteed, it had to be fought for. The next board meeting was tense. Gabrielle and Victor stood side by side at the head of the table, presenting the comprehensive plan she had crafted. The directors listened, their expressions ranging from skeptical to intrigued. This plan will cost millions, one director argued. And the timeline you're proposing is aggressive. Is it even feasible? Gabrielle met his gaze, unflinching. Feasibility isn't the issue here, necessity is. The cost of doing nothing is far greater, financially and morally. Victor chimed in. We've already seen the damage this has done to our reputation. This isn't just an investment in ethics, it's an investment in the future of the company. Eleanor Carter leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. I agree with Mrs. Walker. This isn't a debate about cost. It's about whether we're willing to lead or continue to follow outdated practices. And I, for one, am tired of following. Her endorsement shifted the mood. Slowly, the directors began to nod. Gabrielle's confidence grew, they were on the brink of something transformative. By the end of the meeting, the board voted overwhelmingly in favor of the plan. Gabrielle felt a wave of relief, but she knew this was only the beginning. Implementation would be a long, uphill battle, fraught with resistance and challenges. But for the first time, she felt the tide was turning. That evening, Gabrielle sat on the balcony of their home, a glass of wine in hand. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder of the world she was working to change. Victor joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You did it, he said, his voice filled with pride. We did it, she corrected, leaning into him. But there's still so much to do. And we'll do it, he assured her. One step at a time. Gabrielle smiled, a sense of quiet determination settling over her. She had always believed in justice, but this fight had reignited something deeper, a calling to leave the world better than she found it. And with Victor by her side, she knew she wouldn't stop until she did. The airline's crisis wasn't just a scandal, it was a reckoning. Gabrielle and Victor knew that the systemic issues exposed by the incident went beyond one officer or one department. It was time to rebuild not just policies, but the company's very ethos. Gabrielle's phone buzzed as she reviewed the latest audit findings in her office. The name on the screen made her pause. Eleanor Carter. Eleanor, Gabrielle greeted, her voice tinged with surprise. What can I do for you? Eleanor didn't waste time. I've been thinking about the bigger picture. Fixing the security department is a start, but what about the rest of the company? Gabrielle leaned back in her chair, intrigued. Go on. We need a task force, Eleanor continued, something cross-departmental with real teeth. Not just to address bias, but to ensure ethical practices across the board. And I want you to lead it. The words hung in the air for a moment. Gabrielle felt a flicker of pride, but also the weight of responsibility. That's a significant undertaking, she said cautiously. It won't be easy. Eleanor's tone softened. Nothing worth doing ever is. But if anyone can do it, it's you. Gabrielle smiled faintly. All right. Let's make it happen. Over the next few weeks, Gabrielle worked tirelessly to form the task force. She handpicked members from across the company, focusing on individuals with a reputation for integrity and innovation. Among them was Liam Patel, a rising star in HR known for his progressive policies, and Carmen Diaz, a veteran pilot who had long advocated for diversity in aviation. The first meeting was held in a sleek conference room with a large glass wall overlooking the runway. Gabrielle stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding. Thank you all for being here, she began. What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of deeper issues within this company. Our job is to identify those issues and create real, lasting solutions. The room was silent for a moment, then Liam spoke up. Where do we start? Gabrielle's lips curved into a determined smile. We start by listening. The task force began hosting listening sessions with employees from every level of the company. Gabrielle sat in on many of them, hearing stories that were equal parts heartbreaking and enraging. A black flight attendant recounted being overlooked for promotions despite glowing reviews. A young Latino mechanic described how his ideas were dismissed by senior staff until a white colleague repeated them. Each story added fuel to Gabrielle's resolve. She took meticulous notes, weaving them into a comprehensive report that would form the foundation of their recommendations. But not everyone welcomed the changes. One morning, Gabrielle arrived at her office to find an anonymous note on her desk. Stop stirring the pot before you drown in it. The words were scrawled in jagged handwriting, the meaning unmistakable. Victor was livid when he saw it. This is unacceptable, he said, pacing the room. We need to report this. Gabrielle shook her head. No. That's exactly what they want, for me to back down, to be intimidated. I won't give them the satisfaction. But the threats didn't stop. Anonymous emails, snide comments in meetings, and even a tampered report designed to discredit her work tested her resolve. Yet Gabrielle refused to waver. The turning point came during a company-wide town hall where Gabrielle presented the task force's findings. The event was live-streamed to employees worldwide, making it the most public moment of her career. Standing on the stage, Gabrielle spoke with the conviction of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. This company has a choice, she said. We can cling to outdated practices and watch our reputation crumble, or we can lead the way in creating a more equitable and ethical industry. The world is watching, and so are our employees. What kind of legacy do we want to leave? The room erupted in applause. For the first time, Gabrielle felt the tide truly turning. Meanwhile, the investigation into Michael Grayson and James Cole uncovered more than expected. Grayson's embezzlement scheme had siphoned millions from training programs, while Cole's misconduct extended to falsifying reports and intimidating witnesses. Both men were not only fired but also faced criminal charges. Gabrielle watched as news outlets picked up the story, their headlines a mix of justice served and corporate reckoning. It wasn't just about punishing individuals, it was about setting an example. Months later, the airline unveiled its new policies, which included mandatory bias training, revamped promotion criteria, and an anonymous reporting system for unethical behavior. Gabrielle stood beside Victor at the launch event, her heart swelling with pride. This is only the beginning, she said quietly to him. But it feels like the start of something real. Victor smiled, squeezing her hand. That's because it is. Late one evening, Gabrielle returned to the airport where it all began. She walked past the security checkpoint, now staffed by officers who had undergone rigorous retraining. Some recognized her and nodded respectfully. She paused for a moment, taking in the bustling terminal, the chatter of travelers, the hum of 100 stories unfolding at once. This was what she had fought for, not just justice for herself, but for everyone who had been silenced, overlooked, or mistreated. As she boarded her flight, a sense of peace washed over her. The fight wasn't over, but she had already won the most important battle, proving that change was possible. And for Gabrielle Walker, that was only the beginning. Gabrielle's victory was a significant milestone, but the work ahead loomed even larger. The implementation of the new policies, training programs, and oversight mechanisms required relentless attention and constant refinement. Gabrielle found herself juggling multiple responsibilities, from overseeing the task force to addressing resistance within the company. One of the most challenging aspects was dealing with the quiet opposition. While most employees welcomed the changes, a vocal minority resisted, clinging to outdated practices and attitudes. Gabrielle understood that dismantling systemic issues was not just about implementing new rules but also about changing hearts and minds. To address this, the task force launched a series of interactive workshops designed to foster empathy and understanding among employees. These workshops were led by a mix of external experts and internal leaders like Carmen Diaz, whose personal stories of overcoming bias inspired many. Gabrielle made it a point to attend as many sessions as possible, not just as a figurehead but as an active participant. One afternoon, during a particularly emotional session, a middle-aged pilot stood up. His voice trembled as he said, "I'll be honest, I didn't think we needed all this. But hearing these stories, it's opened my eyes. I see now that we've got to do better." Moments like these fueled Gabrielle's determination. They were a reminder that change, while slow and painful, was indeed possible. As the months went by, Gabrielle noticed a shift in the company culture. Conversations about diversity and ethics became more common, and employees started to hold each other accountable. The anonymous reporting system proved to be a game changer, allowing employees to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. Gabrielle personally reviewed many of these reports, ensuring that they were taken seriously. But the work wasn't without setbacks. One day, a major news outlet published an exposé questioning the effectiveness of the airline's reforms. The article cited unnamed sources who claimed that the changes were superficial and that discrimination still persisted in subtler forms. Gabrielle read the article with a sinking heart, knowing it would be a blow to the company's reputation. Victor found her in her office that evening, staring at the screen. "You okay?" he asked, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. She sighed. This was bound to happen. Change isn't linear. There will always be those who doubt or resist. Victor nodded. True. But this article doesn't tell the whole story. We've made real progress, and the people who matter see that. Gabrielle smiled faintly. You're right. We just need to keep pushing. The next day, Gabrielle held a press conference to address the article. Standing at the podium, she spoke candidly about the challenges and the progress the company had made. Transformation doesn't happen overnight, she said. It's a journey, and we are committed to seeing it through. We know there's more work to be done, and we're not afraid to confront the hard truths. Our goal isn't to look perfect, it's to be better. Her honesty struck a chord, earning praise from employees and the public alike. The article, while critical, became a catalyst for deeper conversations about accountability and the complexity of cultural change. As the year progressed, the airline began to see tangible results. Employee satisfaction scores improved, customer complaints about security diminished, and the company's reputation slowly began to recover. Gabrielle knew these metrics were important, but what mattered most to her were the stories she heard from employees who finally felt seen and valued. One evening, as she prepared for a late-night flight, Gabrielle ran into a young woman in the terminal. The woman hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Mrs. Walker," she said nervously. Gabrielle smiled. "Yes?" "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm a flight attendant, and for the first time, I feel like this company actually cares about people like me." Gabrielle's chest tightened with emotion. "That means a lot to me. Thank you for sharing that." As the woman walked away, Gabrielle felt a renewed sense of purpose. She boarded her flight with a lighter heart, knowing that the impact of her work was rippling outward, touching lives in ways she couldn't always see. The airline's transformation became a case study in corporate ethics, with industry leaders seeking Gabrielle's advice on implementing similar reforms. She found herself speaking at conferences and participating in panels, her voice becoming a beacon for change. Each opportunity reinforced her belief that her fight was bigger than one company, it was about setting a standard for an entire industry. One day, as Gabrielle stood on stage delivering a keynote address, she spotted Victor in the audience. His proud smile reminded her of how far they had come and how much they had overcome together. After the event, Victor joined her backstage. "You're incredible, you know that," he said, wrapping an arm around her. She laughed softly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Yes, you could have," he replied. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." Their journey was far from over, but Gabrielle knew they were on the right path. The fight for justice, equity, and integrity was a long one, but it was a fight worth taking on. And as long as she had the strength to push forward, she wouldn't stop. Gabrielle's work began to influence not only her airline but also the broader industry. Articles and features lauded her leadership, and other companies started reaching out for guidance on implementing their own reforms. Still, Gabrielle remained grounded, knowing the journey was far from complete. For every success story, there were reminders of how much work remained. One day, Gabrielle was invited to speak at an industry-wide summit on corporate ethics in aviation. The event, hosted in New York, was attended by executives, policymakers, and activists from across the globe. Gabrielle prepared meticulously, determined to make her message resonate. On the day of the summit, she took the stage in a grand auditorium filled with hundreds of attendees. The room quieted as she began. "Good morning," she started, her voice steady and clear. "A year ago, I found myself in an airport security office, falsely accused, humiliated, and subjected to a bias that many people face every day. What happened to me wasn't unique. It was a symptom of a deeper issue, a system that, whether intentionally or not, marginalizes individuals based on their appearance, background, or identity." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the audience. "But here's what I've learned," she continued. "Change is possible. It's not easy, and it's not quick. It requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths, taking accountability, and committing to action even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular." As she spoke, she shared the challenges and triumphs of the reforms she had implemented. She highlighted the stories of employees who had once been overlooked but were now thriving in an environment that valued them. She didn't shy away from discussing the resistance, the anonymous threats, or the skepticism she had faced. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Several people stood, their faces reflecting a mix of admiration and hope. Gabrielle stepped down from the stage, feeling a surge of gratitude. This moment wasn't just about her, it was about all the people fighting similar battles in their own industries. Afterward, a young woman approached her, eyes wide with excitement. "Mrs. Walker, your story inspired me," she said. "I'm starting a diversity initiative at my company, and I've been struggling to get people on board. Hearing you talk about your journey, it gives me hope." Gabrielle smiled warmly. "It's hard work, but it's worth it. Don't give up. If you ever need guidance, don't hesitate to reach out." Moments like these reaffirmed why Gabrielle had fought so hard. She knew that each step forward was a step toward building a better, more equitable future. Back at the airline, Gabrielle continued her work with the task force. The reforms expanded beyond security, touching every aspect of the company. Recruitment practices were overhauled to prioritize diversity and inclusion. Leadership training emphasized empathy and ethical decision-making. Even the advertising campaigns shifted, showcasing a commitment to representation and inclusivity. Gabrielle's efforts began to pay off in measurable ways. Employee retention rates improved, and customer satisfaction surveys reflected a growing trust in the airline. Shareholders, initially skeptical of the costs, saw the long-term value of the changes. The airline's reputation, once marred by scandal, was now a shining example of how a company could turn adversity into an opportunity for growth. But Gabrielle knew better than to grow complacent. She made it a point to stay connected to employees at all levels, hosting regular town halls and visiting worksites to hear their concerns directly. During one such visit, she spoke with a young mechanic who shared his experiences of feeling unheard in the past. "It's different now," he said. "I feel like my voice matters. Like I'm part of something bigger." Gabrielle smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You are. And I want you to keep speaking up. That's how we keep moving forward." One evening, as Gabrielle and Victor relaxed at home, reflecting on the journey they had undertaken, Victor raised a glass to her. "To you," he said, his tone full of admiration. "For never giving up, even when it felt impossible." Gabrielle clinked her glass against his, her smile tinged with emotion. "To us," she corrected. "For standing together through it all." The world of aviation wasn't perfect, and it likely never would be. But Gabrielle knew they had created a foundation for others to build upon, a legacy of justice, integrity, and hope. And as she looked to the future, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together with Victor, her team, and the countless others inspired by her fight, she knew they could continue to make a difference, one step at a time. Months later, Gabrielle found herself preparing for one of the most significant milestones of her journey, the unveiling of the airline's Equity and Accountability Framework, a comprehensive initiative designed to promote fairness, transparency, and inclusion across every facet of the organization. The launch event was scheduled to take place at the airline's headquarters and was set to include media, employees, and stakeholders. The night before the event, Gabrielle stood by the window of her office, gazing at the city lights. Despite the progress she and her team had made, she couldn't shake a sense of nervous anticipation. This wasn't just about policy or public perception, it was about solidifying the values she believed in and ensuring they would outlast her tenure. Victor walked in, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her, his expression calm yet knowing. "You're thinking about tomorrow." Gabrielle nodded. "It's a big day. I want it to be perfect." Victor smiled. "It won't be perfect, it'll be real. And that's what matters." The next morning, Gabrielle stood on a stage in a large, sunlit atrium filled with hundreds of attendees. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the framework's guiding principles: integrity, inclusion, transparency, accountability. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "When we started this journey, we knew it wouldn't be easy. Change never is. But we also knew it was necessary. Today, I'm proud to present the result of countless hours of listening, learning, and hard work, the Equity and Accountability Framework. This is more than a policy, it's a promise, a commitment to creating a company where everyone feels valued and respected." She outlined the framework's key components, including mandatory leadership accountability reviews, employee resource groups, an external audit panel, and a scholarship program to support underrepresented communities in pursuing careers in aviation. As she spoke, she saw nods of agreement and even some tears in the audience. Employees and executives alike seemed to resonate with her message. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Gabrielle felt a wave of relief and pride. This was the culmination of everything she had fought for. Later that day, as the attendees mingled and discussed the framework, Gabrielle walked through the crowd, speaking with employees and stakeholders. She was approached by a young intern who introduced herself nervously. "Mrs. Walker, I just wanted to say thank you," the intern said. "I come from a small town, and I never thought I'd feel like I belonged in a place like this. But what you've done, it makes me believe that I do." Gabrielle placed a hand on the intern's shoulder. "You do belong. And don't let anyone make you think otherwise." The intern smiled, her confidence visibly bolstered. Gabrielle walked away, her heart full. Moments like these were the true measure of success. As the airline's transformation gained momentum, Gabrielle's influence extended beyond her company. She was invited to join a global coalition on corporate ethics, where she collaborated with leaders from various industries to share best practices and advocate for systemic change. Her work became a model for how businesses could address inequity and rebuild trust. At the same time, Gabrielle remained deeply connected to the people who had inspired her journey. She continued to mentor young professionals, advocate for marginalized voices, and ensure the initiatives she had championed were implemented with integrity. One evening, as Gabrielle and Victor hosted a small gathering at their home, Carmen Diaz raised a toast to Gabrielle for proving that courage and determination can reshape not just a company, but an entire industry. The group cheered, and Gabrielle felt a swell of gratitude. She glanced at Victor, who smiled at her with unwavering pride. After the guests had left, Gabrielle sat on the couch, reflecting on how far they had come. She knew the road ahead would still be challenging, progress was never a straight line. But she also knew they had built something enduring, something that would inspire others to continue the fight. As the city lights twinkled outside, Gabrielle leaned against Victor and whispered, "We did it." Victor wrapped an arm around her. "We did. And we're not done yet." Gabrielle smiled, a quiet resolve settling over her. The work would never truly end, but neither would her commitment to justice, equality, and hope. Together, they would keep pushing forward, one step at a time. And that, she knew, was the legacy worth fighting for. In the months that followed, Gabrielle continued to see the ripple effects of the work she had championed. The equity and accountability framework became a living document, not just a static set of rules. Its principles began influencing every department in the airline, from customer service to operations. Employees embraced the changes, many becoming ambassadors for the new culture. One day, Gabrielle attended a ceremony where the airline honored its first class of scholarship recipients. The program, designed to help underrepresented groups enter the aviation industry, had received hundreds of applications from aspiring pilots, engineers, and aviation professionals. Gabrielle sat in the front row, watching as the recipients shared their dreams and thanked the company for the opportunity. When one young man, Jamal, took the stage, his words struck a chord. "Growing up, I didn't think someone like me could have a place in aviation. But now, because of this program, I feel like I'm not just chasing my dream, I'm living it." Gabrielle felt tears welling in her eyes. Jamal's story was proof that the work she and her team had done mattered, not just in the abstract but in real, tangible ways. After the ceremony, Jamal approached Gabrielle. "Mrs. Walker, I just wanted to say thank you. Your story is the reason I applied for this scholarship." She smiled, shaking his hand. "You're the reason we created it. The skies are yours, go make the most of it." Jamal's face lit up, and Gabrielle walked away with a renewed sense of purpose. Every story like his reminded her of why she fought so hard, even when the path had been fraught with resistance and doubt. Meanwhile, Gabrielle's influence continued to grow beyond the airline. She was invited to participate in a task force organized by the Department of Transportation to address diversity and inclusion across the aviation industry. At the first meeting, Gabrielle sat alongside representatives from government, private corporations, and advocacy groups. The room buzzed with energy and ideas, and Gabrielle felt a deep sense of responsibility. During one discussion, a colleague from another airline remarked, "Your company's turnaround has been remarkable. How did you manage to get everyone on board?" Gabrielle replied, "It wasn't easy. But we listened, we learned, and we led with transparency. Most importantly, we showed people that this wasn't just about policies. It was about values. When people believe in what they're working toward, real change becomes possible." The task force quickly became a platform for Gabrielle to share her insights and learn from others. She helped draft guidelines that would later become industry standards, including recommendations for fair hiring practices and frameworks for addressing bias in customer interactions. At home, Gabrielle and Victor often reflected on how far they had come. One evening, as they sat in their backyard under the stars, Victor turned to her. "You've changed so much, not just the airline, but the industry," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "How does it feel?" Gabrielle thought for a moment, then said, "It feels like we're finally starting to see what's possible when we put people first. But I also know there's still so much more to do." Victor nodded. And if anyone can do it, it's you. The following week, Gabrielle received an email from an employee she had never met. The subject line read, "You changed my life." In the email, the employee, a baggage handler named Rosa, described how the company's changes had impacted her. "I used to feel invisible," Rosa wrote. "But now, I feel seen. I feel valued. And I feel like I'm part of something bigger. Thank you for fighting for us." Gabrielle read the email twice, her chest tightening with emotion. It was moments like these, quiet, personal reminders of the impact of her work, that kept her moving forward. Years later, Gabrielle's efforts culminated in her being recognized with a national award for her contributions to corporate ethics and equity. At the awards ceremony, she took the stage to a standing ovation. In her acceptance speech, she reflected on the journey that had brought her there. "This recognition isn't just for me, it's for everyone who believed that change was possible, even when it felt impossible," she said. "It's for every voice that has been silenced, every dream that has been dismissed. Together, we've shown that when we fight for justice, we don't just change policies, we change lives." As she stepped off the stage, Gabrielle felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The work she had done wasn't just about righting a wrong or fixing a system, it was about creating a legacy of hope, integrity, and possibility. That night, as she sat with Victor at the awards dinner, he raised a glass to her. "To the woman who never stopped fighting." Gabrielle clinked her glass against his. "To the journey, and the people who made it worth it." Her fight wasn't over, but Gabrielle knew she had made a lasting impact. And as she looked ahead, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that she had the strength, the vision, and the support to keep pushing for a better, fairer world. Years later, Gabrielle Walker's legacy within the airline and beyond was undeniable. The policies she had implemented became benchmarks in corporate governance, referenced not only in aviation but across industries. Her name became synonymous with courage, equity, and transformation, and she was sought after for speaking engagements, board memberships, and advisory roles. But Gabrielle never let the accolades distract her from the work that remained. She knew that while she had paved the way for progress, it was up to the next generation to carry the torch forward. She spent much of her time mentoring young professionals, particularly women and people of color, who aspired to leadership roles in aviation. One of her mentors, Priya, was a recent graduate working in operations management. Priya often sought Gabrielle's advice, navigating the challenges of corporate culture with her guidance. During one meeting, Priya confessed, "I sometimes feel like I don't belong here. Like I'm always proving myself, no matter how much I accomplish." Gabrielle leaned forward, her expression compassionate but firm. "I know that feeling well. But remember this, you do belong, and the fact that you're here means you've already proven yourself. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. And if you ever need a reminder, call me." Priya smiled, the weight on her shoulders visibly lifting. Gabrielle watched her walk away, knowing that empowering others was as crucial as any policy she had ever written. As the years passed, Gabrielle's impact continued to ripple outward. The scholarship program she had helped create expanded, supporting hundreds of students from underrepresented backgrounds in pursuing aviation careers. Many of those students went on to hold key positions in the industry, their success stories a testament to the power of opportunity and support. One of the most poignant moments came during the airline's centennial celebration. Gabrielle, now retired, was invited as the keynote speaker to reflect on the company's journey. Standing on the same stage where she had once presented her equity and accountability framework, she felt a flood of memories. Looking back, she began, "I'm reminded of the day I stood here and promised change. That change didn't come easily, it came with resistance, challenges, and sacrifices. But it also came with hope, resilience, and a belief in the power of people to do better." She paused, scanning the room filled with employees, executives, and industry leaders. "Today, I see the fruits of that work in all of you. This company isn't perfect, no company is. But it's striving to be better, and that's what matters. My hope is that you'll continue this work, not just for yourselves but for the generations that follow." The room erupted in applause as Gabrielle stepped off the stage. She was greeted by Victor, who hugged her tightly. "You've done something extraordinary," he whispered. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Gabrielle found herself standing near the terminal where her journey had begun. The memories of that day, of the humiliation, the anger, and the determination it had sparked, came rushing back. But now, those memories felt like the roots of something much larger, something that had grown and flourished in ways she could never have imagined. A young security officer approached her, his face alight with recognition. "Mrs. Walker," he said nervously. "I just wanted to say thank you. I read about what you did, and it inspired me to apply for this job. I wanted to be part of the change." Gabrielle smiled warmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The fact that you're here means the change is already happening. Keep pushing forward, you're part of something bigger than yourself." As she walked away, Gabrielle felt a profound sense of peace. She had taken a moment of injustice and turned it into a movement. She had fought not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or underestimated. And while her active role in the fight was over, she knew the work would continue. Sitting beside Victor on their flight home, Gabrielle looked out at the clouds, the vast expanse of sky a reminder of the limitless possibilities that lay ahead. The fight for justice, equity, and dignity was never truly over, but as long as there were people willing to stand up and lead, there was always hope. And for Gabrielle Walker, hope was the most powerful legacy of all.